You're in the wrong section, honey. The help enters through the service door.
The words sliced through the humid air of Chicago O'Hare Terminal 3 like a blade, sharp and deliberate. Richard Blackwell didn't even look up from his platinum boarding pass as he spoke. His voice carried the practiced authority of a man who had never been told no in his 52 years of life. The woman standing behind him in the first-class boarding line didn't flinch. Zara Williams adjusted the hood of her gray sweatshirt and kept her place in line, her dark eyes steady and calm. Rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating a rhythmic backdrop to the tension building in the gate area. "Excuse me?" Zara's voice was soft but clear, cutting through the ambient noise of gate announcements and rolling luggage. Richard turned slightly, his steel-gray eyes sweeping over her appearance with barely concealed disgust. Faded jeans, worn sneakers, and a backpack that had seen better days. To him, she was exactly what he expected from someone who had clearly stumbled into the wrong boarding queue. "First class is for paying customers," he said louder this time, ensuring the gate agent and nearby passengers could hear. "Economy boarding starts in 20 minutes. You'll want to head over to gate B12. The gate area fell silent. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. A businessman in a tailored suit lowered his Financial Times. A woman clutching designer luggage turned to stare. Even the gate agents paused their pre-boarding preparations to watch the unfolding drama. Zara Williams stood perfectly still, her breathing steady and controlled. She had been here before. Not in this exact terminal, not with this specific man, but in countless variations of the same scenario. The assumption that she didn't belong. The casual dismissal of her presence. The expectation that she would simply apologize and disappear. But tonight was different. Tonight she was tired. She had spent the last 72 hours in back-to-back negotiations in Silicon Valley, fighting for a contract that would revolutionize aviation safety worldwide. She had been questioned, challenged, and doubted by room after room of executives who looked exactly like Richard Blackwell. She had smiled through their condescension, answered their technical questions with precision, and proven her worth again and again. And she had won. Skytech Dynamics had secured the largest aviation software contract in U.S. history. But the victory felt hollow as she stood in this boarding line once again defending her right to exist in a space she had not only paid for, but earned. "I'm in first class," Zara said calmly, holding up her boarding pass. The electronic display showed her name clearly. Williams Zara. Seat 1A. Richard barely glanced at the phone screen. "Anyone can fake those," he scoffed. "Security." He raised his voice, gesturing toward the TSA checkpoint. "We have someone trying to board with fraudulent documents." Before Zara could respond, the gate agent approached. Robert Davis was a 45-year-old man who had worked for Meridian Airlines for 12 years. He had seen everything, or so he thought. His name tag hung slightly crooked on his navy blue vest, and his expression carried the weariness of someone who had handled too many difficult passengers in too many long shifts. "Is there a problem here?" Robert asked, his eyes immediately focusing on Zara rather than Richard. "This woman is trying to board first class with what appears to be a fraudulent boarding pass," Richard said, straightening his designer tie. "I'm a Platinum Elite member. I've been flying with Meridian for 15 years. I know genuine documentation when I see it." Robert turned to Zara, his expression already skeptical. "Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass and identification?" Zara handed over her phone and driver's license without protest. Robert examined them carefully, taking far longer than necessary. He scanned the boarding pass 3 times, compared the license photo to her face repeatedly, and even held the license up to the light as if checking for watermarks. "This seems unusual," Robert muttered, though both documents were clearly legitimate. "When did you book this ticket?" 3 weeks ago, Zara replied evenly. "Through your website. Confirmation number M7X9K2. Robert typed the confirmation into his system, frowning at the screen. The reservation was valid, paid for with a platinum credit card, and showed no flags or irregularities. But something about the situation felt wrong to him. The woman in front of him, with her casual clothes and quiet demeanor, didn't match his mental image of their typical first-class passengers. There appears to be some kind of discrepancy, Robert said finally, though no discrepancy existed. I'm going to need to verify this with my supervisor. Richard smiled triumphantly. I thought so. You can always spot the real from the fake. As Robert walked away to make his call, Zara remained motionless in line. Behind her, other passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some whispered to their companions. Others pulled out their phones, sensing that something significant was happening. In seat 2B of the nearby departure lounge, Sofia Rodriguez looked up from her laptop. The 24-year-old social media influencer had been editing photos from her latest sponsored post when the commotion caught her attention. With 80,000 followers across her platforms, Sofia had developed an instinct for moments that mattered. This felt like one of them. She discreetly opened her phone's camera app and began recording. Back at the gate, Robert returned with his supervisor, a harried woman named Janet Morrison, who had been dealing with weather delays all evening. She examined Zara's documents with the same excessive scrutiny despite having no legitimate reason to doubt their authenticity. The reservation appears to be valid, Janet admitted reluctantly. But we've had issues with credit card fraud lately. Ma'am, can you provide additional verification? Perhaps the credit card used for the purchase. Zara reached into her wallet and produced a black American Express Centurion card. The weight and feel of the card were unmistakable, but Janet held it as if it might bite her. These can be counterfeited, Richard interjected, leaning over to examine the card. I've seen very sophisticated fakes. The magnetic strips are nearly perfect. Sir, please step back, Janet said, though her tone suggested she agreed with his assessment. She swiped the card through her reader. It processed immediately, showing a credit limit that made her eyes widen briefly. The card was real. The reservation was real. The boarding pass was real. But the woman holding them still didn't fit Janet's preconceptions. Well, Janet said slowly, everything appears to be in order. But given the unusual circumstances, I think it would be best if we upgraded you to our premium economy section instead. It has much more legroom and you'd be more comfortable there. I paid for first class? Zara said, her voice remaining level despite the growing absurdity of the situation. I would like to sit in first class. Richard laughed, a harsh sound that echoed across the gate area. Honey, even if that ticket is real, which I seriously doubt, first class isn't just about the seat. It's about the experience. It's about being around people who understand luxury, who appreciate fine things. You'd be out of place up there. I think I can handle sitting in a chair, Zara replied calmly. The comment drew a few quiet chuckles from nearby passengers, which only served to irritate Richard further. His face flushed red and his voice rose another octave. This is exactly what I'm talking about, he snapped. No respect for the institution of first-class travel, no understanding of proper etiquette. They let just anyone buy a ticket these days, and it ruins the entire experience for legitimate passengers. Sofia Rodriguez's recording finger trembled slightly as she captured Richard's words. In the comments of her live stream, which had quietly begun 5 minutes earlier, her followers were already expressing outrage. Is this man serious right now? She whispered into her phone. Meanwhile, 47 floors above downtown Chicago, Luis Garcia sat in his corner office at SkyTech Dynamics headquarters, working late to finalize the details of their landmark contract. The 41-year-old chief technology officer was used to his boss keeping unusual hours, but he was surprised when his secure phone buzzed with a text message from Zara. Flight delayed. Dealing with interesting customer service situation. Might need to implement Protocol 7. Luis stared at the message for several seconds. Protocol 7 was code for a complete shutdown of SkyTech's integration services. It would ground every aircraft using their navigation software, affecting more than 60% of commercial flights in North America. It was a nuclear option reserved for the most extreme circumstances. He typed back quickly. "Boss, are you sure? That's a lot of planes." The response came immediately. "Not yet. But keep the systems ready. I'll let you know." Luis leaned back in his chair, wondering what kind of customer service situation could possibly warrant such drastic action. Zara wasn't impulsive. She was measured, strategic, always thinking several moves ahead. If she was even considering Protocol 7, something serious was happening. Back at O'Hare, the boarding process had finally begun. Robert had reluctantly accepted Zara's documentation, though he continued to treat her with suspicion. Richard Blackwell had been allowed to board first, despite his disruptive behavior because of his elite status. As Zara walked down the jet bridge, she felt the familiar weight of expectation and prejudice pressing down on her shoulders. She thought about her parents who had died in a plane crash when she was 16. The accident had been caused by outdated navigation software, a tragedy that could have been prevented with better technology. That tragedy had driven her to study computer science, to build Skytech from nothing, to revolutionize aviation safety, one line of code at a time. She had spent 22 years building a company that made flying safer for millions of people every day. But none of that mattered to the people judging her by her appearance. The aircraft was a Boeing 777-300ER Meridian's flagship for international routes. As Zara stepped into the first-class cabin, she was greeted by Maria Santos, a 31-year-old senior flight attendant who had been working for the airline for 7 years. Maria was proud of her job. She supported her 8-year-old daughter as a single mother, and the airline's benefits had allowed her to buy a small house in Queens. She worked hard to provide excellent service to all passengers, but she had learned through experience that certain passengers required more attention than others. "Good evening," Maria said with a practiced smile. "Welcome aboard. Flight 847 to London Heathrow. May I see your boarding pass?" Zara held up her phone, showing the same boarding pass that had been scrutinized multiple times in the gate area. Maria glanced at it quickly, then looked at Zara's casual attire. "Seat 1A," Maria confirmed. "Right this way." As they walked toward the front of the cabin, Maria noticed that Seat 1A was already occupied. Richard Blackwell sat comfortably in the window seat, his laptop open and a glass of pre-departure champagne in his hand. "Excuse me, sir," Maria said politely. "I believe there may be some confusion about seating arrangements." Richard looked up from his screen with an expression of mild annoyance. "No confusion at all. I'm in my usual seat. 1A as always." Maria turned to Zara, then back to Richard. In her experience, seating disputes were usually resolved by accommodating the higher status passenger. Richard's platinum medallion was clearly visible on his luggage tag, while Zara appeared to be a first-time first-class passenger. "Let me check my manifest," Maria said diplomatically. She pulled out her tablet and scrolled through the passenger list. Both names appeared for Seat 1A, but she noticed a small notation next to Richard's name indicating his elite status. "Mr. Blackwell, your reservation shows Seat 2A, but I can see you have elite status, Ms. Williams, your boarding pass shows 1A, but..." Maria trailed off, unsure how to proceed diplomatically. "But she's obviously in the wrong place," Richard finished. "Look at her. Does she look like someone who belongs in first class? I've been flying this route monthly for 5 years. I always sit in 1A. This is clearly some kind of mistake." Maria felt a familiar knot in her stomach. She had been in similar situations before, and they never ended well. The safe choice was always to accommodate the elite passenger and hope the other person would accept an alternative. Ma'am Maria said to Zara, "I can offer you an excellent seat in our premium economy section. It has extra legroom, priority meal service, and complimentary beverages. As compensation for the inconvenience, I can also provide a future travel voucher." "I paid for first class," Zara said simply. "I would like to sit in first class." Richard sighed dramatically. This is exactly what I was talking about at the gate. No understanding of how things work up here. Maria, can you please handle this? I have important calls to make before takeoff. Maria looked around the cabin nervously. Other passengers were boarding and beginning to notice the commotion. A few had their phones out, and she could see at least one person recording video. Captain James Mitchell emerged from the cockpit, having been alerted to the situation by his ground crew. The 49-year-old veteran pilot had been flying commercial aircraft for 23 years and had seen his share of passenger disputes. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked, his voice carrying the natural authority of his position. "Just a seating mix-up," Captain Maria replied quickly. "We're resolving it now." Richard stood up, extending his hand to the captain. "Richard Blackwell, Platinum Elite member. I believe this woman is trying to claim my seat with some kind of fraudulent boarding pass." The gate agents were suspicious as well, but apparently decided to let her board anyway. Captain Mitchell shook Richard's hand, noting the firm grip and confident eye contact of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. He turned to examine Zara, taking in her casual appearance and quiet demeanor. "Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass and identification?" Zara handed over her documents for what felt like the 10th time that evening. Captain Mitchell examined them carefully, comparing the license photo to her face and checking the boarding pass details. "Everything appears to be in order," he said slowly. "But given Mr. Blackwell's status with our airline, and in the interest of avoiding further delays, perhaps we can find you a comparable seat elsewhere on the aircraft." Captain Richard interjected. "I really think you should look more closely at those documents. I've seen very sophisticated forgeries lately. Someone clearly coached her on how to appear legitimate." The suggestion hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Captain Mitchell found himself looking at Zara's documents again, despite having already verified their authenticity. The power of suggestion was strong, especially when it came from someone he perceived as credible. Sir Zara said, her voice barely above a whisper, but somehow commanding attention. "I have presented valid identification, a legitimate boarding pass, and the credit card used to purchase my ticket. I have done everything required of me. Now I would like to sit down." "Don't get an attitude with the captain," Richard snapped. "Show some respect." For the first time that evening, something flickered in Zara's eyes. Not anger, but something deeper. Recognition, perhaps, or resignation. She had built a company worth over $4 billion. She employed more than 8,000 people across 6 countries. Her software guided aircraft safely through the skies every minute of every day, protecting millions of lives. But none of that mattered in this moment in this cabin to these people. Maria, Captain Mitchell said finally, "Let's resolve this quickly. We need to maintain our departure schedule." "Of course," Captain Maria replied, understanding the implicit instruction. "Ma'am, I have a lovely seat in row 23 premium economy with extra legroom and complimentary meal service." "That's not first class," Zara said. "Well, technically no," Maria admitted. "But it's really quite nice. And again, I can offer you a voucher for future travel." "I paid for first class," Zara repeated. "I would like to sit in first class." Richard rolled his eyes and returned to his seat, clearly considering the matter settled. "Maria, can you bring me another champagne and make sure the meal service starts promptly once we're airborne? I have a very important conference call scheduled." As he settled back into seat 1A, Richard pulled out his phone and began composing a text message to his assistant, delayed by airline's inability to handle obvious fraud. These people have no idea how to maintain standards anymore. Will be filing complaint. Meanwhile, Sofia Rodriguez had moved closer to the first-class cabin, her phone still recording. Her live stream had grown to nearly 2,000 viewers, and the comments were flowing in faster than she could read them. "This is unbelievable," she whispered into her camera. "They're literally kicking her out of her paid seat because of how she looks." In the chat, her followers were expressing increasing outrage. "This is straight-up discrimination. Someone needs to call the news." "What airline is this?" I'm never flying with them again. Post this everywhere. This needs to go viral. Sophia didn't notice the irony that she was posting everything everywhere in real time. Back in the first-class cabin, Zara stood quietly in the aisle, her boarding pass still in her hand. The weight of 2 decades of similar moments pressed down on her shoulders. Every corporate boardroom where she had been mistaken for the secretary. Every business dinner where she had been assumed to be someone's wife rather than the CEO. Every conference where her technical expertise had been questioned until she proved herself beyond any reasonable doubt. She thought about her parents again, about the promise she had made at their graves to make flying safer for everyone. She thought about the thousands of employees who depended on her leadership, the millions of passengers who trusted her technology with their lives, the responsibility that came with the power she had built. And she made a decision. Zara pulled out her phone and sent a simple text message to Luis Garcia, Implement Protocol 7. Now. The response from Luis came back immediately. Boss, are you certain? That's 847 aircraft currently in flight. Zara typed back without hesitation. I'm certain. Begin with all Meridian flights. Expand if necessary. She slipped her phone back into her pocket and looked directly at Captain Mitchell. I will be sitting in seat 1A, which I purchased 3 weeks ago. If you have any further questions about my documentation or my right to be here, I suggest you contact your corporate offices. Captain Mitchell felt a subtle shift in Zara's tone, something that made him pause. There was a quiet authority in her voice that hadn't been there before, a steel beneath the softness that spoke of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but we need to resolve this situation and maintain our departure schedule, he said, though with less confidence than before. Then I suggest you ask Mr. Blackwell to move to his assigned seat, Zara replied evenly. Richard laughed from seat 1A, not bothering to look up from his phone. That's not how this works, sweetheart. Status has its privileges. You'll learn that when you actually earn your place in first class. The comment was the final straw for Sofia Rodriguez, who had been silently recording from the galley area. She stepped forward, her phone still streaming live. Excuse me, she said loudly enough for the entire cabin to hear. I'm Sofia Rodriguez, and I'm live streaming this entire incident. What I'm seeing here is absolutely unacceptable discrimination. Her sudden appearance caused a stir throughout the cabin. Passengers who had been pretending not to watch suddenly looked up from their phones and magazines. The businessman in 2B started his own recording. A couple in row 3 began whispering urgently to each other. Ma'am, please return to your seat, Maria said, approaching Sophia with obvious anxiety. Recording is not permitted during boarding. Actually, recording in public spaces is completely legal, Sophia replied, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who knew her rights. And my 80,000 followers deserve to see how this airline treats its passengers. Richard finally looked up from his phone, noticing the commotion for the first time. What's all this about? This is about you stealing someone's seat and the crew helping you do it, Sophia said, pointing her camera directly at him. Richard's face flushed red. I beg your pardon. I have done nothing wrong. I am sitting in my assigned seat. Your boarding pass says 2A, Sophia replied, having overheard Maria's earlier comment about the manifest. This woman's boarding pass says 1A. The math isn't that complicated. Young lady, you need to mind your own business, Richard snapped, standing up from the disputed seat. This is a private matter between valued passengers and the airline. Discrimination is everyone's business. Sophia shot back her live stream comment section, exploding with support for her stance. Captain Mitchell realized the situation was spiraling out of control. What had started as a simple seating dispute was becoming a public relations nightmare with social media documentation that could be devastating for the airline's reputation. Everyone, please, calm down, he said, raising his voice to address the entire cabin. We will resolve this matter quietly and professionally. There's nothing quiet about racism, Sophia replied, her phone still recording. And there's nothing professional about what I've witnessed here. Richard stepped into the aisle, his considerable height allowing him to loom over Sophia intimidatingly. Are you calling me a racist? Do you have any idea who I am? I manage over $2 billion in investments. I employ hundreds of people. I don't need to explain myself to some social media influencer. Your bank account doesn't give you the right to steal someone's seat, Sophia replied, refusing to be intimidated. I'm not stealing anything, Richard insisted. I'm a Platinum Elite member. I've been flying first class since before she could afford a bus ticket. This seat is mine by right. By right, Zara spoke for the first time since sending her text message, her voice cutting through the argument with quiet precision. What right is that exactly? Richard turned to face her, his expression condescending. The right of merit. The right of someone who has earned their place through hard work and success. The right of someone who belongs here. And you determined that I haven't earned my place? How exactly, Zara asked, stepping closer. By looking at my clothes, by the color of my skin, by some assumption about my background or qualifications. I determined it by observation, Richard replied, his voice rising. By experience, by understanding that certain standards exist for a reason. The exchange was being captured not only by Sophia's live stream, but by multiple passengers throughout the cabin. The businessman in 2B had posted the video to his LinkedIn account. The couple in row 3 was sharing it on Facebook. A teenager in economy had uploaded clips to TikTok where they were already being shared and commented on. Maria Santos watched the scene unfold with growing panic. She had seen difficult passengers before, but nothing like this. The social media attention was exactly what the airline trained them to avoid. Every moment that passed meant more exposure, more potential damage to Meridian's reputation. Please, everyone, she said, her voice shaking slightly. Let's resolve this calmly. I can speak with ground services about alternative arrangements. The only alternative arrangement needed, Zara said calmly, is for Mr. Blackwell to move to his assigned seat in 2A. That's not happening, Richard declared. I've already made myself comfortable. She can take 2A if she wants to stay in first class. She bought 1A, Sophia pointed out, still filming. Why should she have to compromise when you're the one in the wrong seat? Because that's how the real world works, Richard replied. Status matters. Experience matters. Knowing your place matters. The phrase, knowing your place, echoed through the cabin like a gunshot. Several passengers visibly recoiled. The businessman in 2B shook his head in disgust. The elderly couple in row 3 exchanged horrified glances. Captain Mitchell knew he had lost control of the situation completely. What should have been a minor seating adjustment had become a viral discrimination incident captured from multiple angles and broadcast to thousands of viewers in real time. Mr. Blackwell, he said finally, perhaps you could consider moving to seat 2A as a gesture of goodwill. Richard whirled around to face the captain, his composure finally cracking. Absolutely not. I am a 15-year Platinum Elite member. I have spent over $500,000 with this airline. I will not be displaced by some fraudulent passenger with a fake boarding pass. The boarding pass isn't fake, Maria said quietly, though her voice carried clearly in the tense cabin. I've verified it multiple times. Then how do you explain this situation? Richard demanded. How does someone like her end up in seat 1A? Someone like me. Zara repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. You know exactly what I mean, Richard replied. Someone who clearly doesn't understand the environment they're trying to enter. Someone who doesn't appreciate the standards and expectations of first-class travel. Sophia's livestream viewers were reaching a fever pitch in the comments. This man is absolutely vile. Someone needs to report this to the airline. What's his name? He needs to be exposed. This poor woman, how is she staying so calm? Back in Chicago, Luis Garcia was monitoring news feeds and social media mentions of SkyTech while preparing for Zara's requested protocol implementation. He noticed an unusual spike in airline-related social media activity and began investigating. Within minutes, he had found Sophia's livestream and several other social media posts documenting the incident. He watched in growing anger and amazement as his boss, one of the most powerful people in the aviation industry, was humiliated by an ignorant passenger and enabled by airline staff. Luis immediately opened his secure communication system and began sending alerts to his team. Code 7 preparation, he typed. All hands on deck. This is not a drill. Back on the aircraft, the situation continued to deteriorate. More passengers had begun openly recording the confrontation, and several had started posting to their own social media accounts. The hashtag #Seatgate was beginning to trend on Twitter. Captain Mitchell made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career. Instead of enforcing the clear documentation that supported Zara's claim to seat 1A, he chose to side with the passenger he perceived as more valuable to the airline. "Ma'am," he said to Zara in the interest of maintaining our departure schedule and avoiding further disruption, "I'm going to have to ask you to accept alternative seating arrangements." "Alternative to the seat I purchased?" Zara asked. "We can offer you seat 2A, which is still first class, or an upgrade to premium economy with additional compensation." "I want seat 1A, Zara said simply. "That seat is occupied," Captain Mitchell replied, though he knew the occupation was illegitimate. "By someone who doesn't belong there," Sophia interjected, her camera still rolling. "Ma'am, I need you to stop recording and return to your seat," Captain Mitchell said, finally acknowledging Sophia's presence officially. "I'm not doing anything wrong," Sophia replied. "I'm documenting discrimination, which is my right as a passenger and a citizen." Richard stepped closer to Sophia, his intimidation tactics becoming more obvious. "You're interfering with airline operations. That's a federal offense." "No, what's a federal offense is discrimination based on race," Sophia shot back, "which is exactly what's happening here." Captain Mitchell felt the situation slipping further from his control with each passing moment. The aircraft was supposed to have departed 15 minutes earlier. Ground control was asking for updates. His crew was looking to him for leadership, and he was failing at all of it. "Security," he said into his radio. "I need assistance in the first-class cabin." The announcement that security was being called caused a new wave of anxiety throughout the aircraft. Passengers who had been quietly recording suddenly became more obvious about it. Several people started making phone calls to friends and family, describing what they were witnessing. Within minutes, 2 airport security officers boarded the aircraft. They approached the first-class cabin with the assumption that they would be dealing with an unruly passenger who needed to be removed. "What's the situation?" asked Officer Jennifer Walsh, a 10-year veteran of airport security. "We have a passenger refusing to accept alternative seating arrangements," Captain Mitchell explained. "She's disrupting boarding and delaying departure." Officer Walsh looked around the cabin, taking in the scene. She saw Richard Blackwell sitting comfortably in seat 1A, looking like every other first-class business traveler she had encountered. She saw Zara Williams standing in the aisle, dressed casually and holding a boarding pass. Her unconscious bias led her to the same conclusion that everyone else had reached. "Ma'am," she said to Zara, "I understand there's some confusion about seating. Can you show me your boarding pass?" Zara handed over her phone for what felt like the 20th time. Officer Walsh examined it carefully, then looked at Richard. "Sir, could you show me your boarding pass as well?" Richard produced his boarding pass, which clearly showed seat 2A. Officer Walsh frowned, comparing the 2 documents. "Mr. Blackwell, your pass shows 2A, but you're sitting in 1A. "There's obviously been a computer error," Richard replied smoothly. "I always sit in 1A. I'm a Platinum Elite member. The system knows to assign me my preferred seat automatically." Officer Walsh had no way to verify the technical aspects of Richard's claim, but his confident demeanor and elite status were persuasive. Meanwhile, Zara's casual appearance and quiet responses seemed suspicious to someone trained to identify potential troublemakers. "Ma'am," Officer Walsh said to Zara, given the confusion about seating assignments, "I think the best solution would be for you to accept alternative arrangements. The airline has offered you comparable seating, and we need to get this flight moving." "I paid for seat 1A, Zara replied. "I would like to sit in seat 1A. "Ma'am, you need to be reasonable here. Mr. Blackwell is clearly a valued customer, and the airline has made you a fair offer." Sofia Rodriguez, who had been filming the entire exchange, finally reached her breaking point. "This is insane," she shouted loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "You're taking the word of someone sitting in the wrong seat over someone with documented proof of their reservation. This is textbook discrimination." Officer Walsh turned to address Sofia, her authority clearly challenged. "Ma'am, you need to stop interfering with our investigation." "What investigation?" Sofia demanded. "She has a boarding pass for 1A. He has a boarding pass for 2A. He's sitting in 1A. What exactly are you investigating?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, because Officer Walsh knew Sofia was right. The documentation was clear, the solution was obvious, but the passengers involved didn't match her expectations, and that was clouding her judgment. Meanwhile, Zara's phone buzzed with a text message from Luis Protocol 7, ready to implement. "All Meridian aircraft can be grounded within 60 seconds of your command." "Are you sure about this?" Zara looked around the cabin one more time. She saw the security officers who had already decided she was the problem. She saw the airline staff who had chosen to protect a disruptive passenger over an honest one. She saw the man in her seat smirking with the confidence of someone who knew the system would protect him. She typed back, "Implement now." At SkyTech headquarters, Luis Garcia's fingers flew across his keyboard, entering the commands that would change everything. Sofia Rodriguez's live stream had exploded beyond anything she had ever experienced. What started with her usual 80,000 followers had grown to nearly 50,000 live viewers, with the number climbing every second. The comments section moved so fast, it was impossible to read individual messages, but the overall sentiment was unmistakably clear outrage. "Guys, this is absolutely unbelievable," Sofia whispered into her camera, positioning herself to capture both Zara standing calmly in the aisle and Richard Blackwell sitting smugly in the disputed seat. "I'm watching blatant discrimination happen in real time, and the airline is enabling it." Her viewers were not passive observers. Within minutes of the stream beginning, they had identified Meridian Airlines as the carrier, found the flight number, and begun a coordinated social media assault. Hashtag Seatgate was now trending in Chicago and rapidly spreading to other major cities. Flight rights. Now tweeted thread. "What we're witnessing on @Meridian Air Flight 847 is organized discrimination. A black woman with valid documentation is being forced out of her paid seat. This is 2024, not 1964. #Seatgate. The tweet was retweeted 3,000 times in the first 10 minutes. @Travel Justice Hub posted live discrimination happening now on Meridian Airlines. Woman with valid first-class ticket being kicked out because she doesn't look the part. This is America in 2024. Seatgate Namarchar Travel. While black business traveler Daniel Park, sitting in 2B, had been quietly observing the entire confrontation while posting updates to his LinkedIn account. As a Korean-American venture capitalist who had experienced his own share of aviation discrimination, the scene was painfully familiar. "I cannot stay silent while witnessing this injustice," he said, standing up and addressing the cabin. "This woman has shown valid documentation multiple times. She has been patient and respectful despite being treated abhorrently. As a fellow passenger, I demand that this airline honor her legitimate reservation." His intervention sent a ripple through the cabin. Other passengers began to murmur their agreement. The elderly couple in row 3, Margaret and Harold Thompson, exchanged glances before Harold stood up as well. "We've been flying for 40 years, Harold said, his voice carrying the authority of his 73 years. "We've never seen anything like this. This lady has every right to her seat, and it's shameful that she's being treated this way." Margaret Thompson pulled out her iPad and began recording as well. "I'm sending this to our granddaughter. She's a journalist with the Washington Post. People need to know about this." The social media documentation was expanding exponentially. Young mother Jessica Williams, traveling with her 2 children in row 4, had been discreetly live streaming on Facebook to her family group chat when the incident escalated beyond her comfort level. "Mom, are you seeing this?" she typed in her family chat. "There's actual discrimination happening on my flight. I'm scared to speak up because I'm traveling alone with the kids, but this is horrible." Her mother immediately shared the stream to her own Facebook page, where it was picked up by local news monitoring services in 3 different cities. Meanwhile, teenage passenger Marcus Johnson had been TikToking the entire incident from his seat in economy. His video, set to trending audio about standing up for what's right, had already garnered 50,000 views and was climbing rapidly. The comment section on his TikTok was a mix of outrage and calls to action. "Drop the airline name. We need to boycott. Someone get this man's name and employer. That poor woman staying so calm through this. This is why I film everything now." Back in first class, the pressure was mounting from all directions. Captain Mitchell could see passengers throughout the cabin recording the incident. His radio crackled with increasingly urgent messages from ground control demanding to know why the flight hadn't departed. "Flight 847, you are now 45 minutes behind schedule. We need immediate status update on departure readiness." Maria Santos approached the captain with visible anxiety. "Sir, I'm getting reports that this incident is being broadcast live on multiple social media platforms. Corporate communications is already receiving calls from news outlets." The weight of the situation finally began to sink in for Captain Mitchell. This wasn't just a difficult passenger situation anymore. This was a public relations crisis of massive proportions, being documented in real time by dozens of witnesses and broadcast to hundreds of thousands of viewers. Richard Blackwell, however, seemed oblivious to the growing attention. He had returned his focus to his laptop, typing furiously as if the commotion around him was beneath his notice. Mr. Blackwell Daniel Park said from his seat in 2B, "I think you should reconsider your position. This situation is being recorded by multiple passengers and broadcast live to a very large audience." Richard glanced up dismissively. "I'm not concerned about social media nonsense. The airline knows who their valuable customers are. This will blow over in a few hours." Sir Harold Thompson interjected, "You are sitting in a seat that belongs to someone else. Your boarding pass clearly shows 2A. The right thing to do would be to move." "The right thing," Richard replied with obvious irritation, "is for people to understand their place. I've been flying first class for 15 years. I've earned the right to sit where I'm comfortable. I'm not moving for someone who clearly doesn't belong here." His words were captured by every recording device in the cabin and immediately shared across multiple platforms. The phrase "doesn't belong here" was particularly damaging, providing clear evidence of the discriminatory mindset driving his behavior. Sophia Rodriguez, still live streaming, provided commentary for her growing audience. "He just said she doesn't belong here. Did everyone catch that? He's literally saying that a black woman with a valid first-class ticket doesn't belong in first class." In 2024. On camera. The response in her comment section was immediate and overwhelming. "Clip that. Clip that evidence. Someone screen record this entire thing. Send this to every news outlet. I'm never flying Meridian again." How is this man's employer not aware of this, unknown to the passengers on the aircraft? The social media storm was beginning to have real-world consequences. Meridian Airlines' corporate communications team was fielding calls from major news outlets, including CNN, ABC News, and the New York Times. Their Twitter account was being bombarded with thousands of angry tweets, and their stock price was beginning to fluctuate as investors took notice of the growing scandal. At SkyTech headquarters, Luis Garcia was monitoring multiple data streams simultaneously. His primary focus was preparing for Protocol 7 implementation, but he was also tracking the social media explosion surrounding his boss. Elena, he called to his deputy. I need you to monitor news feeds and social media mentions. Something big is happening and we need to be ready for anything. Elena Rodriguez, a sharp 29-year-old software engineer, immediately began pulling social media feeds onto the main display screens. Within minutes, the SkyTech Operations Center looked like a mission control room during a crisis. Luis, she said, her voice tight with concern. This is everywhere. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. The hashtag #Seatgate is trending nationwide. There are at least 15 different live streams happening simultaneously. Luis watched the feeds in growing amazement and anger. He had worked with Zara for 8 years and had never seen her lose her temper or treat anyone disrespectfully. Watching her endure such blatant discrimination while maintaining her dignity was both inspiring and infuriating. Are we ready for Protocol 7? He asked his team. All systems green came the response from multiple workstations. We can ground every Meridian aircraft in 60 seconds on your command, and the rest of the fleet. Every airline using SkyTech navigation can be affected if necessary. That's approximately 68% of commercial aviation in North America. Luis understood the magnitude of what they were preparing to do. Grounding hundreds of aircraft would cause massive disruption, affecting hundreds of thousands of passengers and costing the airline industry millions of dollars in delays and cancellations. But watching his boss being humiliated on live television, he found it hard to care about the consequences for an industry that had allowed such treatment to continue. Back on the aircraft, Officer Walsh was growing increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. The original call had been for assistance with an unruly passenger, but what she was witnessing didn't match that description at all. Zara Williams had been nothing but calm and respectful throughout the entire ordeal. She had provided valid documentation, repeatedly answered every question politely, and never raised her voice or made any threatening gestures. Richard Blackwell, on the other hand, had been dismissive, condescending, and increasingly hostile toward other passengers who spoke up. His behavior was far more disruptive than anything Zara had done. Captain Mitchell Officer Walsh said quietly, pulling him aside. I need to ask directly what specific airline policy is this passenger violating? Because from what I can see, she has valid documentation and has been completely cooperative. Captain Mitchell realized he was trapped by his own poor decisions. He had allowed the situation to escalate based on assumptions and bias rather than facts and policy. Now, with multiple recordings capturing every moment, he was facing the consequences of his failure in leadership. She's refusing alternative seating arrangements, he said weakly. But why should she accept alternatives when she has a valid ticket for her assigned seat? Officer Walsh pressed. The question hung in the air unanswered because there was no legitimate answer. The discrimination was so obvious that even airport security was beginning to question the airline's position. Meanwhile, the social media storm continued to grow. Celebrity endorsements began appearing as the story reached beyond aviation and travel circles. Actor Mark Russell watched the #Seatgate footage. Absolutely disgusting discrimination in 2024. At Meridian Air, you should be ashamed. That woman showed more grace than I would have. Comedian Sarah Chen. How is this real? How are people still this awful? And how is Meridian Air allowing it? #Seatgate, #do something. The amplification from celebrity accounts pushed the story into trending topics across all major social media platforms. News outlets began reaching out to passengers offering payment for exclusive footage and interviews. Daniel Park received a call from CNN while still in his seat. Mr. Park, This is Jenny Martinez from CNN. We understand you're witnessing a discrimination incident on Meridian Flight 847. Would you be willing to provide a statement? Margaret Thompson's granddaughter at the Washington Post was already drafting a story based on the footage her grandmother had sent. The headline read, "Viral video shows Black woman denied first-class seat, despite valid ticket on Meridian Airlines flight." The story was being written and fact-checked in real time, ready to publish the moment the incident concluded. As the media attention intensified, Zara Williams stood quietly in the aisle of the aircraft, still holding her boarding pass, still waiting for the seat she had purchased. She had become the center of a national conversation about discrimination, dignity, and corporate responsibility. But she was also something else that nobody in that cabin yet understood. She was the person with the power to ground every aircraft in the sky. Her phone buzzed with a final message from Luis Reddy, "When you are boss, just say the word." Zara looked around the cabin one more time, taking in the faces of the passengers, recording her humiliation. The airline staff who had failed to protect her rights, and the man sitting smugly in her seat. Then she typed a single word. Now. At 11:47 p.m. Eastern Time, every air traffic control center in North America received the same automated alert simultaneously. The message was brief. Clinical and devastating SkyTech navigation systems experiencing critical failure. All aircraft using SkyTech guidance must return to nearest airport immediately. This is not a drill. In the control tower at Chicago, O'Hare supervisor Janet Rodriguez stared at her screen in disbelief. "What the hell is happening?" she called out to her team. "I'm showing navigation failures on 67% of our traffic." Similar scenes were playing out in control towers from Seattle to Miami, from Toronto to Mexico City. Hundreds of aircraft suddenly found their navigation systems displaying warning messages, forcing immediate route changes and emergency landings. On Meridian Flight 847, the first indication of something unusual came from the flight deck. Captain Mitchell's radio crackled to life with an urgent message from ground control. "Flight 847, be advised, we're showing navigation system anomalies on multiple aircraft. Stand by for possible routing changes." Captain Mitchell exchanged glances with his first officer, David Kim. In 23 years of flying, he had never heard such a widespread system failure reported. Ground Control Flight 847. Can you clarify the nature of these anomalies? Flight 847, we're showing SkyTech navigation failures across the board. We need you to hold position and prepare for possible return to gate. The words SkyTech navigation failures hit Captain Mitchell like a physical blow. Every pilot in commercial aviation knew about SkyTech dynamics. Their software guided more aircraft than any other single system in the world. A widespread SkyTech failure was the kind of catastrophic event that grounded entire fleets. In the first-class cabin, Richard Blackwell looked up from his laptop with irritation. "What's all this radio chatter about? Are we going to depart or not?" Before Captain Mitchell could respond, his phone began buzzing with urgent text messages. The first was from Meridian's Operations Center. "All flights hold at gate. Navigation system failures reported nationwide. Do not depart until further notice." The second message was from his own airline's chief pilot, Jim. "Are you seeing the news? SkyTech systems are down everywhere. This is bigger than 9/11 for aviation. Every airline is grounded." Captain Mitchell's hands began to shake as he read the messages. A nationwide aviation shutdown meant thousands of flights, hundreds of thousands of passengers, and millions of dollars in losses every hour. But how could SkyTech systems fail so completely and so suddenly? In the cabin, passengers were beginning to notice something was wrong. Business traveler Daniel Park, who had been monitoring aviation news on his phone, looked up with alarm. "Captain," he called out, "I'm seeing reports of widespread flight cancellations across the country. Something about navigation system failures." The information rippled through the cabin like wildfire. Passengers pulled out their phones, checking news websites and airline apps. Within minutes, the scope of the situation became clear. Sofia Rodriguez, still live streaming, read the breaking news alert to her viewers. This is incredible, guys. Every major airline in the country is reporting system failures. Hundreds of flights are being grounded. This is unprecedented. But amid the growing panic and confusion, one passenger remained perfectly calm. Zara Williams stood in the aisle, still holding her boarding pass, watching the chaos unfold around her with an expression of quiet satisfaction. Her phone buzzed with a message from Luis Garcia Protocol 7, implemented successfully. All Meridian aircraft grounded, expanding to other carriers as requested. Media are reporting it as widespread system failure. Zara typed back. Perfect. Maintain until I give the all clear. Captain Mitchell emerged from the cockpit, his face pale with stress. He had just received word that not only were all Meridian flights grounded, but every other airline using SkyTech navigation was experiencing the same failures. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced to the cabin, I need to inform you that we will not be departing this evening. We're experiencing widespread navigation system issues affecting multiple airlines. We'll need to return to the gate for deplaning. Richard Blackwell stood up angrily. This is unacceptable. I have a critically important meeting in London tomorrow morning. What kind of incompetent operation are you running here, sir? This appears to be an industry-wide issue not specific to Meridian Airlines, Captain Mitchell replied, though his voice lacked conviction. Industry-wide, Richard scoffed. That's impossible. These systems are designed with multiple redundancies. You don't have simultaneous failures across multiple carriers unless someone is grossly incompetent. His words carried throughout the cabin, captured by the multiple recording devices still documenting the ongoing drama. But something in his confident assertion about aviation systems caught Zara's attention. She spoke for the first time since the navigation alerts began, her voice cutting through the noise with quiet authority. You're absolutely right, Mr. Blackwell. These systems are designed with multiple redundancies. Simultaneous failures across multiple carriers would indeed require either gross incompetence or deliberate action. Richard turned to look at her, surprised that she had spoken. Exactly. Someone needs to be held accountable for this disaster. Someone will be, Zara replied, and something in her tone made several passengers look up from their phones. Captain Mitchell was coordinating with ground control when his radio crackled with an unexpected message. Flight 847, be advised, we're receiving reports that the navigation failures may be related to SkyTech Dynamics. Their corporate offices are not responding to our calls for technical support. The mention of SkyTech Dynamics caused a stir throughout the cabin. Several passengers began searching for information about the company on their phones. Daniel Park, with his background in venture capital, was among the first to find relevant information. SkyTech Dynamics. He read aloud from his phone, is a private aviation software company founded in 2002. They provide navigation and safety systems to more than 60% of commercial aircraft in North America. He continued reading. The company was founded by... His voice trailed off as he read the next line. His eyes widened and he looked up at Zara with sudden understanding. Founded by CEO Zara Williams, he finished quietly. The cabin fell silent. Every recording device, every live stream, every conversation stopped as the implications of that name sank in. Sofia Rodriguez was the first to break the silence. Wait, she said slowly, her live stream capturing her growing realization. Zara Williams. The woman who's been standing here for the past hour. You're the CEO of SkyTech. Zara met her gaze calmly. I am. Richard Blackwell's face went through several color changes as the reality hit him. The woman he had dismissed, insulted, and tried to humiliate was not only a legitimate first-class passenger, but the CEO of the company that controlled the navigation systems for most of the aircraft in the sky, including the one he was sitting on. That's impossible, he stammered. You're dressed like... You look like someone who doesn't belong in first class. Zara finished for him. like someone who couldn't afford a bus ticket, like someone who doesn't understand the value of $1. The phrases Richard had used earlier were now being thrown back at him, recorded by multiple devices and broadcast to hundreds of thousands of viewers who were beginning to understand the delicious irony of the situation. Captain Mitchell felt the blood drain from his face as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. He had not only failed to support a paying passenger's rights, but had actively participated in discriminating against one of the most powerful people in the aviation industry. "Ms. Williams," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I had no idea." "No," Zara replied calmly. "You had no idea who I was. But that shouldn't have mattered. Every passenger deserves to be treated with dignity and respect regardless of their appearance or perceived social status." Maria Santos, who had been standing frozen in the galley, finally found her voice. "Ma'am, I am so incredibly sorry. I made assumptions. I followed the wrong protocol. You assumed that someone who looks like me couldn't possibly belong in first class," Zara said, not unkindly, but with absolute clarity. "You assumed that someone with elite status was automatically more credible than someone with valid documentation. You chose to protect what you perceived as a valuable customer rather than doing your job correctly." The words hung in the air like an indictment captured by every recording device and transmitted live to a growing global audience that now understood they were witnessing something far more significant than a seating dispute. Luis Garcia's voice came through Zara's phone speaker loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Boss, you're trending worldwide. #Seatgate has over 2 million mentions. CNN is calling it the largest aviation disruption in history. Should we maintain the shutdown?" The confirmation that the nationwide aviation crisis was directly connected to the woman standing in the aisle sent shockwaves through the cabin. Passengers began whispering urgently to each other, sharing what they had just learned with viewers of their own social media streams. Richard Blackwell seemed to collapse into himself as the full scope of his error became clear. He had not only humiliated one of the most powerful executives in the aviation industry, but had done so on camera in front of witnesses and during a live broadcast to hundreds of thousands of viewers. I didn't know," he said weakly. "If I had known who you were, if you had known who I was," what Zara asked pointedly, "you would have treated me with respect. You would have honored my reservation. You would have acknowledged my right to occupy the seat I purchased." Richard opened his mouth to respond, but found no words. The truth was exactly what Zara was implying. He would have acted differently only because of her power and wealth, not because it was the right thing to do. "The problem with your worldview, Mr. Blackwell," Zara continued, "is that you believe respect is something that must be earned through status or wealth. You believe that some people inherently deserve better treatment than others based on their appearance or your assumptions about their background." She looked around the cabin, addressing not just Richard, but every passenger and crew member present. "Every person who boards an aircraft has the same fundamental right to be treated with dignity. Whether they're wearing a business suit or a hoodie, whether they're flying first class or economy, whether you recognize their name or not." Captain Mitchell stepped forward, his career and reputation in ruins. "Ms. Williams, on behalf of Meridian Airlines, I apologize for the treatment you received. This should never have happened. No, it shouldn't have." Zara agreed. But it did happen. And it happens every day to people who don't have the power to ground aircraft when they're mistreated. Her phone buzzed again with an urgent message from Luis Boss. "Meridian's stock is down 18% in after-hours trading. Other airlines are falling too. The FAA is demanding answers." "How long do you want to maintain the shutdown?" Zara looked at Richard Blackwell, still sitting in her seat, still refusing to move despite everything that had been revealed. She looked at Captain Mitchell, whose poor leadership had allowed the situation to escalate. She looked at Maria Santos, whose assumptions and bias had enabled discrimination. Then she looked at the passengers who had spoken up for her Daniel Park Herald and Margaret Thompson. Sofia Rodriguez, who had documented everything. People who had done the right thing not because they knew who she was, but because they recognized injustice when they saw it. "Mr. Blackwell," she said finally, "I believe you're sitting in my seat." Richard looked up at her, his earlier arrogance completely deflated. Without a word, he gathered his belongings and moved to seat 2A, where he should have been all along. Zara Williams finally took her seat in 1A, the seat she had purchased, the seat she had been denied, the seat that had triggered the largest aviation shutdown in history. She pulled out her phone and typed a message to Luis, all clear. "Bring the systems back online." Within minutes, navigation systems across the country began functioning normally again. But the impact of what had happened would reverberate through the aviation industry for years to come. The restoration of SkyTech's navigation systems brought immediate relief to air traffic control centers across North America. But the consequences for those responsible for the evening's discrimination were just beginning. As aircraft systems came back online and the grounding was lifted, the full scope of the disruption became clear to industry executives, government officials, and the millions of travelers affected by the unprecedented shutdown. At Meridian Airlines headquarters in Atlanta, CEO Jonathan Pierce was awakened at 2:17 a.m. by his chief of staff. The emergency briefing he received in his home office was unlike anything in his 30-year career in aviation. "Sir, we have a situation that requires your immediate attention," his chief of staff, Rebecca Martinez, said as she handed him a tablet loaded with social media feeds, news reports, and internal incident reports. "One of our flights was involved in a discrimination incident that triggered a nationwide aviation shutdown." Pierce scanned the documents with growing disbelief. The hashtag #Seatgate was trending globally. News outlets from CNN to BBC were covering the story as breaking news. Meridian's stock price had plummeted 22% in after-hours trading, and their corporate communications department was being overwhelmed with calls from reporters, civil rights organizations, and federal investigators. "How many flights were affected?" Pierce asked, dreading the answer. 847 aircraft were grounded nationwide, affecting approximately 180,000 passengers. Direct costs are estimated at $12 million in the first hour alone, climbing exponentially with each hour of delay. Pierce's face went pale as he absorbed the magnitude of the crisis. A discrimination incident on a single flight had triggered the largest aviation disruption since September 11, 2001. And this was caused by our crew's treatment of... Who exactly? Rebecca took a deep breath. Zara Williams, CEO and founder of SkyTech Dynamics. She was denied her paid first-class seat by our gate agent flight attendant and captain, who instead accommodated a disruptive passenger who was sitting in the wrong seat. The irony was devastating. Meridian Airlines had discriminated against the very person whose technology enabled their flights to operate safely. Pierce immediately understood that this wasn't just a public relations crisis. It was an existential threat to the company. "Get me legal communications and operations on a call immediately," he ordered, "and someone needs to contact Ms. Williams personally to offer a direct apology." Back at Chicago O'Hare, the immediate aftermath on the aircraft was chaotic. Passengers were being deplaned while trying to process what they had witnessed. Many continued live streaming and recording, documenting the surreal scene of Richard Blackwell quietly gathering his belongings and avoiding eye contact with other passengers. Captain James Mitchell faced the most immediate professional consequences. His radio crackled with a terse message from Meridian's Operations Center, Flight 847, proceed to gate for immediate deplaning. "Captain Mitchell, report to Chief Pilot upon arrival. This is Priority Alpha." The designation Priority Alpha meant career-ending serious. Mitchell had been flying commercially for 23 years, building a spotless safety record and earning respect throughout the industry. In the span of 2 hours, his poor judgment had destroyed everything he had worked to build. As passengers filed off the aircraft, many approached Zara to express their support and admiration for her composure throughout the ordeal. Daniel Park stopped beside her seat before leaving. "Ms. Williams, I wanted to say that your dignity throughout this entire situation was remarkable. I've witnessed discrimination before, but never seen someone handle it with such grace under such intense scrutiny." Margaret Thompson, the elderly passenger who had recorded parts of the incident, paused as well. "Dear, I've sent everything I recorded to my granddaughter at the Washington Post. This story needs to be told, and those responsible need to be held accountable." Sofia Rodriguez, whose live stream had brought the incident to national attention, was among the last to deplane. "Ms. Williams, thank you for letting me document what happened. My followers saw something important tonight. They saw how dignity and justice can triumph over ignorance and prejudice." But it was Maria Santos who faced perhaps the most difficult moment. As the cabin emptied, she approached Zara with tears in her eyes. "Ms. Williams, I need to apologize directly and personally. I made assumptions based on your appearance. I prioritized the wrong passengers' complaints. I failed to do my job properly, and I enabled discrimination." Her voice broke as she continued. "I have a daughter, and I would never want her to be treated the way I treated you tonight." Zara looked at the young flight attendant with compassion rather than anger. "Maria, I appreciate your apology. What matters now is what you learn from this experience. How will you handle similar situations differently in the future? I'll follow the documentation, not my assumptions. I'll treat every passenger with equal respect regardless of their appearance, and I'll speak up when I see discrimination, even if it's uncomfortable." "That's all anyone can ask," Zara replied. "Growth comes from acknowledging our mistakes and committing to do better." As Zara finally left the aircraft, she was met by a crowd of reporters and photographers who had arrived at O'Hare after the story broke on social media. Security personnel escorted her through the terminal, but not before she made a brief statement. "Tonight's incident represents more than a personal inconvenience," she said, speaking clearly into the microphones thrust toward her. "It highlights deep issues in how we treat people based on their appearance and our assumptions about who belongs where. No one should have to prove their worth or their right to basic respect." A reporter called out, "Ms. Williams, did you intentionally ground the aviation network as retaliation?" Zara paused, choosing her words carefully. "SkyTech Dynamics experienced technical difficulties this evening. Our safety procedures are designed to prioritize safety above all else. When we detected potential issues, we implemented standard safety protocols until the situation could be resolved." The carefully worded response provided no legal ammunition for critics while making it clear that the grounding had been deliberate and justified. Meanwhile, Richard Blackwell found himself facing consequences far beyond the embarrassment of being caught on camera. As he waited for his luggage at baggage claim, his phone rang with a call from his business partner at Blackwell Capital Management. "Richard, what the hell is happening? Your face is all over Twitter associated with some kind of discrimination scandal. Our biggest client just called threatening to pull their account." Richard tried to explain the situation, but found no words that could justify his behavior or minimize the damage to his reputation and business. By morning, 3 major clients had terminated their relationships with Blackwell Capital Management. The firm's assets under management dropped by 40% in less than 12 hours, and Richard faced the possibility of bankruptcy within months. At SkyTech headquarters, Luis Garcia was coordinating with a team of lawyers, public relations specialists, and government liaisons to manage the fallout from Protocol 7. While the technical implementation had been flawless, the legal and political implications were complex. The FAA is demanding a full investigation, reported Elena Rodriguez Luis's deputy. They want to understand how our technologies could fail so completely and so suddenly. "Our technologies didn't fail," Luis replied calmly. "They performed exactly as designed when we detected a critical safety issue. The fact that our safety protocols grounded aircraft across the country demonstrates the robust nature of our safety procedures, not their failure. The legal strategy was elegant frame the shutdown as a response to a safety threat rather than retaliation for discrimination. Since discrimination and hostile treatment of passengers could indeed compromise flight safety, the argument had technical merit. Dr. Angela Foster, SkyTech's chief legal counsel, arrived at headquarters at 4:00 a.m. to coordinate the company's response to inevitable government inquiries and potential lawsuits. "We need to be prepared for congressional hearings, FAA investigations, and civil rights lawsuits," she warned. "But we also have significant leverage here. Our technology is essential to the safe operation of commercial aviation. Any attempt to punish the company for implementing safety protocols could be seen as compromising aviation safety." The morning news cycle brought unprecedented attention to the incident. CNN's lead story featured the complete timeline of events supported by multiple angles of video footage from passengers. The segment included aviation experts explaining the significance of SkyTech's role in commercial aviation and the unprecedented nature of a CEO grounding her own technology in response to discrimination. Dr. Michael Patterson, an aviation safety expert from MIT, provided analysis that supported SkyTech's position. "What we witnessed last night was actually a testament to the robustness of modern aviation safety procedures. When SkyTech detected what they perceived as a threat to safe operations, their technology responded exactly as designed, prioritizing safety over schedule. The framing helped shift public narrative from CEO grounds airlines in tantrum to safety procedures protect passengers from discrimination-related threats." By 7:00 a.m., Meridian Airlines faced a full-scale crisis requiring immediate action. CEO Jonathan Pierce called an emergency board meeting to address the situation and approve decisive measures. "The damage to our reputation is catastrophic," Pierce told his board. "But we have an opportunity to turn this crisis into leadership on civil rights and passenger dignity. I'm recommending immediate termination of all personnel involved in the incident, comprehensive anti-discrimination training for all staff, and a public apology that includes meaningful policy changes." The board approved Pierce's recommendations unanimously. Within hours, Captain James Mitchell, flight attendant, Maria Santos Gate, agent, Robert Davis, and security officer Jennifer Walsh were all terminated from their positions. Captain Mitchell's termination was particularly significant, given his seniority and previously clean record. The Airline Pilots Association initially protested the decision, but withdrew their objection after reviewing the extensive video evidence of his discriminatory behavior. Maria Santos faced the loss of her job as a single mother, but also received an unexpected opportunity. SkyTech Dynamics, impressed by her sincere apology and commitment to change, offered her a position in their customer service training program at a higher salary than her airline position. Ms. Williams believed in giving people second chances, Luis Garcia explained when extending the offer, but only to those who demonstrate genuine understanding of their mistakes and commitment to growth. The offer generated positive media coverage for SkyTech while providing Maria with an opportunity to rebuild her career around the principles she had learned from her mistake. Richard Blackwell, however, faced consequences far beyond career disruption. The Anti-Defamation League announced they were monitoring his case as an example of how racism and discrimination in public accommodations could be documented and prosecuted in the social media age. "Mr. Blackwell's behavior represents textbook discrimination," said ADL Regional Director Sarah Cohen. "The video evidence is irrefutable, and the platform provided by social media means that such behavior can no longer hide in the shadows." Several civil rights organizations announced plans to use Blackwell's case as an educational example in their anti-discrimination training programs, ensuring that his behavior would be remembered and studied for years to come. The stock market response to the crisis was severe, but ultimately revealing about corporate accountability in the social media age. Meridian Airlines' stock price fell 31%, before beginning to recover as the company announced comprehensive policy changes and leadership accountability measures. Other airlines proactively announced their own anti-discrimination training programs and passenger rights initiatives hoping to avoid similar crises. The incident had effectively forced an industry-wide examination of how passengers were treated based on their appearance and perceived social status. By evening, less than 24 hours after the initial incident, the transformation was remarkable. A single act of discrimination had triggered the largest aviation shutdown in history, ended multiple careers, forced industry-wide policy changes, and created a new standard for corporate accountability in the age of social media documentation. Zara Williams had demonstrated that quiet dignity and strategic power could achieve more than loud protests or angry confrontations. She had turned a moment of humiliation into a catalyst for broad change, proving that justice could be served not through revenge, but through the careful application of legitimate authority in service of universal principles. 6 months after the SkyTech incident, as it came to be known in aviation industry circles, the ripple effects continued to reshape how airlines approached customer service, employee training, and corporate accountability. The changes went far beyond policy updates and training sessions. They represented a fundamental shift in how the industry understood its relationship with passengers and the broader public. The Federal Aviation Administration's comprehensive investigation into the incident resulted in new federal guidelines for airline passenger treatment that became known as the Dignity Standards. These regulations, directly inspired by Zara Williams' experience, mandated specific protocols for handling seating disputes, required documentation of all passenger interactions involving discrimination complaints, and established independent oversight mechanisms for civil rights compliance. Administrator Patricia Reynolds announced the new standards at a press conference that drew national attention. The events of that November evening demonstrated how discrimination not only harms individual passengers, but can threaten the safety and efficiency of our entire aviation network. We cannot allow prejudice and bias to compromise the integrity of commercial flight operations. The Dignity Standards included several revolutionary provisions. Airlines were now required to maintain detailed logs of passenger complaints with quarterly reports submitted to federal oversight committees. Any airline employee involved in a discrimination incident faced mandatory additional training and probationary status. Most significantly, airlines that demonstrated patterns of discriminatory behavior faced suspension of their operating licenses. Meridian Airlines became the first carrier to fully implement the new standards, transforming their crisis into industry leadership. CEO Jonathan Pierce hired Dr. Elena Vasquez, a former civil rights attorney, as Chief Passenger Advocacy Officer, creating an entirely new executive position focused on ensuring equal treatment for all travelers. We learned that treating passengers with dignity isn't just morally right. It's essential for business success in the modern era, Pierce explained to the Senate Transportation Committee during hearings on the new regulations. The cost of discrimination extends far beyond legal liability. It threatens the fundamental trust that makes commercial aviation possible. The committee hearings featured testimony from multiple passengers who had experienced similar discrimination, but lacked Zara's power to demand accountability. Their stories revealed that the November incident was not isolated, but representative of broader issues within the industry. James Washington, a black professor from Howard University, testified about being removed from first class, despite holding a valid ticket, with airline staff claiming his seat had been upgraded to someone more suitable. Maria Gonzalez, a Hispanic software engineer, described being questioned extensively about her ability to afford business class tickets on multiple occasions. The pattern of testimony convinced lawmakers that comprehensive reform was necessary. Senator Patricia Kim, chair of the Aviation Subcommittee, noted, "What Ms. Williams experienced was remarkable, not because it was unique, but because she had the power to demand justice." How many other passengers have suffered similar treatment without recourse? The Williams Foundation for Aviation Equity, established by Zara with $50 million of her personal wealth, became a driving force for continued reform. The Foundation provided legal support for passengers experiencing discrimination, funded research into bias in transportation, and created scholarship programs for underrepresented groups pursuing careers in aviation. Dr. Michael Roberts, the Foundation's first executive director, explained their mission. We're not just addressing individual incidents of discrimination. We're working to understand and eliminate the structural factors that make such discrimination possible and common. The Foundation's research division produced groundbreaking studies on passenger treatment disparities. Their analysis of airline complaint data revealed that passengers with traditionally Black or Hispanic names were 340% more likely to experience seating disputes, baggage delays, and customer service problems than those with traditionally white names. Even more striking was their analysis of social media documentation. The Foundation's research team, led by Dr. Jennifer Martinez at Stanford University, found that discrimination incidents were occurring regularly, but rarely generating consequences because most victims lacked the platform or power to demand accountability. Ms. Williams' case was unique not because discrimination happened, but because it was documented comprehensively and because she had the authority to demand widespread change, Dr. Martinez explained in the Foundation's annual report. The training programs developed by the Foundation became the industry standard for anti-discrimination education. Rather than focusing solely on legal compliance, these programs emphasized empathy, unconscious bias recognition, and the business case for treating all passengers with dignity. Maria Santos, the former Meridian flight attendant who had been terminated but later hired by SkyTech, became one of the program's most effective trainers. Her first-hand experience with the consequences of discriminatory behavior provided authenticity that resonated with airline employees. I stood in that cabin and made assumptions about a passenger based on how she looked, Maria would tell training groups. I chose to protect someone I perceived as important over someone with documented rights. I lost my job because of those assumptions, but more importantly, I contributed to a process that denied dignity to a fellow human being. Her presentations included the actual video footage from that November evening, allowing employees to see the progression from initial bias to full-scale discrimination. The emotional impact of watching a respected passenger being humiliated was far more powerful than any policy manual or legal briefing. The success of these training programs led to their adoption beyond the aviation industry. Hotels, restaurants, retail stores, and other service industries began implementing similar bias recognition and dignity protocols. The Williams Foundation provided these programs free of charge, spreading the impact far beyond air travel. Corporate America took notice of the broader lessons from the SkyTech incident. Harvard Business School developed a case study examining how social media documentation could instantly transform isolated discrimination into national scandals, forcing companies to prioritize authentic equality over surface-level compliance. Professor Angela Thompson, who authored the case study, noted, "The Zara Williams case demonstrated that in the social media age, any customer interaction could become a global news story. Companies could no longer afford to train employees to handle discrimination quietly, they had to prevent it entirely." The case study became required reading in MBA programs across the country, ensuring that future business leaders understood both the moral imperative and business necessity of treating all customers with equal dignity. Technology companies beyond SkyTech began developing tools to monitor and prevent discrimination in customer service interactions. AI programs were trained to detect bias in language patterns, seating assignments, and service delivery, providing real-time alerts when discriminatory treatment was detected. These programs, known as equity monitoring platforms, became standard tools for large service organizations. The irony was that technology originally developed to ensure flight safety was being adapted to ensure social justice, a fitting extension of Zara Williams's original mission to use technology to protect people. International aviation organizations took notice of the American reforms and began implementing similar standards globally. The International Civil Aviation Organization adopted the dignity standards as recommended practices for all member nations, extending their impact to airlines worldwide. British Airways, Lufthansa, and Air France all established passenger advocacy positions modeled on Meridian's innovation. Emirates Airlines created a comprehensive bias training program for their diverse international staff. Even airlines in countries with limited civil rights protections began emphasizing equal treatment as a competitive advantage in attracting international passengers. The ripple effects extended to airport design and operations as well. Chicago O'Hare, where the original incident occurred, redesigned their passenger service areas to include dignity consultation spaces where travelers could privately address concerns about discriminatory treatment without creating public confrontations. These spaces, staffed by trained civil rights advocates, provided immediate intervention for potential discrimination incidents before they could escalate. The concept was quickly adopted by other major airports, creating a new standard for passenger protection. The legal landscape surrounding transportation discrimination was also transformed. The Williams case, as legal scholars came to call it, established new precedents for corporate accountability when discrimination was documented on social media platforms. Law schools began teaching courses on digital civil rights, examining how traditional anti-discrimination law applied in an era of live streaming viral videos and global social media attention. The Williams case featured prominently in these courses as an example of how individual dignity could catalyze broad social change. Perhaps most importantly, the incident demonstrated that lasting change required more than policy updates or training programs. It required a fundamental shift in organizational culture. Companies that treated the new standards as compliance checkboxes continued to experience discrimination incidents. Those that embraced the standards as opportunities to build more inclusive and respectful environments saw genuine transformation. Zara Williams herself became a reluctant but powerful advocate for this cultural approach. In speeches to corporate leaders, she emphasized that preventing discrimination required more than rules. It required leadership commitment to treating dignity as a core business value. You cannot train people to respect others if your organization's culture doesn't demonstrate that respect is valued and rewarded, she would tell audiences. Change begins with leadership and flows through every level of an organization. The annual Dignity in Service Awards, established by the Williams Foundation, recognized organizations that demonstrated exceptional commitment to equal treatment across all customer interactions. Winners shared not just their policies, but their cultural transformation stories, providing models for other organizations to follow. As the first anniversary of the SkyTech incident approached aviation industry, leaders gathered for a conference examining the changes that had emerged from that November evening. The consensus was that while significant progress had been made, the work of ensuring dignity for all passengers was far from complete. The conference concluded with a commitment to continue monitoring progress, expanding successful programs, and maintaining pressure for continued improvement. The transformation sparked by one woman's quiet dignity in the face of discrimination had become a movement that would continue long after the initial incident faded from headlines. 1 year and 3 days after the incident that changed everything, Zara Williams found herself boarding another Meridian Airlines flight from Chicago O'Hare to London Heathrow. Same route, same departure gate, same destination, but everything else had transformed beyond recognition. As she approached the boarding area, she noticed the changes immediately. The dignity standards were visible everywhere: prominent passenger rights displays, bias reporting mechanisms, and staff wearing pins indicating their completion of comprehensive equality training. The transformation was not merely cosmetic. It represented a fundamental shift in how the airline approached every passenger interaction. "Good evening, Ms. Williams," said the gate agent, whose name tag read, Jennifer Martinez, Passenger Advocacy Specialist, the new position created in the wake of the SkyTech incident. ensured that every flight had a trained professional specifically responsible for preventing discrimination. "Thank you for flying with us tonight. We're honored to have you aboard." The greeting was respectful but not obsequious, professional but genuinely warm. Zara appreciated that she was being acknowledged for who she was, while understanding that the same courtesy would be extended to every passenger, regardless of their appearance status or background. As she walked down the jet bridge, Zara reflected on the year that had passed. The Williams Foundation had provided support to 847 passengers who had experienced discrimination, helping them navigate complaints processes and legal remedies. The Foundation's scholarship programs had sent 156 underrepresented students to aviation schools and engineering programs. Most importantly, documented incidents of airline discrimination had dropped by 78% industry-wide. The aircraft cabin itself told the story of change. Maria Santos, now a senior customer experience trainer for SkyTech Dynamics, was conducting a post-training observation flight, ensuring that the principles they taught in classrooms translated to real-world passenger interactions. Ms. Williams Maria said as Zara boarded, "It's wonderful to see you again. Your seat in 1A is ready, and I want you to know that every passenger on this flight will receive the respect and dignity you helped us understand they deserved all along." The comment carried deep meaning for both women. Maria's journey from unconscious bias to active advocacy had become a model for employee transformation across the industry. Her story proved that people could grow change and become forces for justice rather than barriers to it. As Zara settled into seat 1A, the same seat that had sparked a revolution, she pulled out her phone and composed a message to her team. On approach to London, reflecting on how far we've come and how much further we can go. Dignity isn't a destination, it's a daily choice. Let's keep choosing well. The flight departed on time, guided by SkyTech navigation technology that had become symbols of how technology could serve justice as well as safety. As the aircraft lifted into the evening sky, Zara looked out the window at the lights of Chicago fading below. She thought about her parents whose memory had driven her to make aviation safer for millions of people. She thought about the moment of discrimination that could have broken her spirit, but instead became a catalyst for change. She thought about the countless passengers who would never experience what she had experienced because ordinary people had found extraordinary courage to do what was right. Sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin not with anger or violence, but with one person's quiet refusal to accept that dignity is negotiable. Sometimes changing the world starts with simply insisting on the seat you paid for. Can you believe the nerve of that guy? He really thought he could just snap his fingers and erase a CEO because she was wearing a hoodie. Richard Blackwell learned the hard way that when you try to steal a seat from a queen, you don't just lose your spot, you lose the whole game. Zara Williams didn't just get her seat back. She cleaned house and proved that true power isn't about the suit you wear, but the code you live by. What would you have done if you were Zara? Would you have grounded the plane, or would you have handled it differently? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of massive corporate karma, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more stories about justice served cold, hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upload. These stories matter because they remind us that dignity isn't determined by your clothes, your accent, or your bank account. It's your birthright, and no one has the power to take it away unless you let them. Until next time, fly safe, check your boarding passes, and never let anyone take your seat. Peace.